Well, now we know why they didn't want us looking at the Department of Education. These numbers come directly from USED.gov, U.S. Department of Education. All right, so DOGE found that a $4.6 million contract was to coordinate Zoom and in-person meetings. There was a $3 million contract to write a report that showed that prior reports were not utilized by the school. Then you have a $1.4 million contract to physically observe mailing and clerical operations. So nobody wants children to be uneducated. What we do want is to take a look at the allocation of funds and realize that something's not right here, and it's theft from the American taxpayer.
Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you are tired of misinformation, political spin and outrage, you are in the right place. Here we break down the headlines, dig into the facts and analyze viral news stories so you can see what is really going on. Lately there has been a lot of noise about government spending, especially this so-called Department of Education scandal. People are claiming millions of taxpayer dollars were wasted. But when you actually look at the numbers, it's a tiny fraction of the budget. So why is this even a debate? Well, that is what we are here to unpack. On this channel, we dive into the latest trending topics, fact-check viral claims, and break down how political narratives shape public opinion. So no proof, no nonsense, just straight-up analysis that makes sense. If that sounds like something you are into, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications and join the conversation in the comments. Let's talk about what is really happening, not just what they want you to believe. So, are we witnessing government waste, a manufactured outrage, or something deeper? Stick around because we are about to get into it. Let's go.
What? That's it? That's what you found as waste at the Department of Education. First of all, it's just ed.gov. It's not used.gov. I don't know what fucking bullshit site you were looking at. But I appreciate you admitting that you can just use the primary source for how these departments spend their money. You don't need Doge to tell you how these departments spend their money. They just pop it on their website because their budgets are public. But the Department of Education has an $80 billion budget. $80 billion with a B. And you found $5 million that you're objecting to? $5 million out of an $80 billion budget. And you're saying that Doge is cutting waste on behalf of the American taxpayer. First of all, it took me exactly 2.5 seconds to find this article from Fox News, which basically is word for word how you described what Doge is cutting. Right? So, like, you're not looking at anything. You're not looking at the U.S. Education Department website. You're not looking at the Doge stuff. You're literally just reading a Fox News article. Like, and word for word quoting it. And somehow this video got, like, over 1 million views. Do your followers know that they can just go on Fox News and you're just reading them verbatim what they can read themselves on Fox News? $80 billion budget. You guys are pissed about $4.5 million to coordinate Zoom and in-person meetings. Yeah, like Zoom and remote learning hasn't been a thing for the past few years. Like Zoom meetings haven't been a thing across every fucking business on goddamn planet Earth for the last 5 years. I haven't done a deep dive into these numbers because frankly, felt like a waste of time because you're so fucking stupid. But I can guarantee you that as a former school board member who managed district budgets, this to me sounds like federal grants to remote sort of rural districts to pay for their Zoom accounts, right? So if you have distance learning kids that have to travel like 20 miles to get to school, maybe schools were applying for federal grants to cover Zoom so those kids didn't have to drive into school, maybe during COVID. Again, $4.6 million out of an $80 billion budget. That seems actually kind of like a reasonable expense, especially for rural communities, you know, like in red states. $3 million to write a report that showed that prior reports were not being utilized. That kind of sounds like efficiency. That kind of sounds like maybe an audit. $3 million for an internal audit to make sure that the reports were up to date and they weren't using old reports. $1.4 million to physically observe mailing and clerical operations. Again, $1.5 million to audit mailing and clerical operations. Self audits. Making sure we're not wasting time. That shit isn't falling through the cracks. $1.4 million out of an $80 billion budget to do this. What is it that you think you have here? You started this by saying you knew, now you know why they were hiding the Department of Education's budget from you. They weren't. You can still look it up because it's public. What do you think you have here? Less than 0.01% of the total budget for what? Zoom meetings and audits of clerical operations. Do you know how much you pay in federal taxes per year? I'm guessing it's nothing. But at the high end, for someone like you, I'm guessing it's between $2,000 and $4,000. Do you know how much of that goes to the $80 billion Department of Education budget? Okay, now let's do the math on how much that, your tax dollars, go to this amount of $80 billion. Less than 0.1% of $80 billion. 25 cents? Maybe 50 cents on the high end. Thank God for Doge.
I do find it interesting that there are people that are on this app all across social media that are more upset at the black people that are saying fuck around and find out than they are at the white people that are doing the harm to them. So what you'll see with a lot of these people is they will say, well, you guys are finding out also. That's interesting. Not because it's almost as if you guys are attempting to erase our experience in this country whole scale. You see, because we have been finding out since a lot of your ancestors came into Africa and kidnapped our ancestors. We have been finding out when a lot of our ancestors were pushed into the ocean by a lot of your ancestors, or chose to jump into the ocean because death was a better fate than to be enslaved. We have been finding out when we got to the British colonies of what would become the United States, and we were put on blocks and sold. Our culture, our language, our history erased in that selling. We have been finding out since we were enslaved for 400 years. We have been finding out since our emancipation and the development of the oldest terrorist group in the world that terrorized our communities all across the South, lynching our family members. We have been finding out since we were being lynched for attempting to walk into the same entrances as white people, sit at the same counters as white people, use our constitutional right to vote, drink out of the same water fountains as white people, go to the same schools as white people. We have been finding out since the inception of the war on drugs, when we see black people that are more likely to receive longer, stricter sentences than any other group of people in this country. And we have been finding out to the recent era, in the era of George Floyd, where we have seen black people indiscriminately targeted by the police. You see, we didn't do anything to find out. What we attempted to tell you guys is we know this country better than a lot of you because of our long history in this country and the oppression that our people have experienced at the hands of this country. We were trying to impart this knowledge on a lot of you. And instead of you listening to us, you started calling us genocide enablers, baby killers, colonizers. A lot of you are more mad at us than you are at the Trump supporters and white people that are actually doing the harm to you. A lot of you see the Trump administration ramping up these mass deportations of Latinos, and instead of you targeting those white people that are doing it to you, you are instead choosing to devote your time, energy, and effort to being anti-black. Because black people are saying, we told you this would happen, and we voted to prevent it. You are seeing the Trump administration basically say that they're going to ethnically cleanse all of the Palestinians out of Gaza. And instead of you looking at those white people that a lot of you voted with, because a lot of you voted for Donald Trump. Remember, Dearborn, Michigan? You're looking at the black people that are saying, we're done. Because we told you this would happen. You see, we're not fucking around and finding out. It's impossible for us to do that because we already knew. We already knew. And that's what we were trying to tell you in this last election. What you thought was bad could always be worse.
Alright, let's get straight into it. People are freaking out over the so-called Department of Education West, but when you actually break it down, there's nothing here. I mean, we are talking about less than 0.1% of the DOE's $80 billion budget dollar, and yet people are acting like they uncovered the biggest scandal of the century. Let's go over the numbers again. The claim is that $4.6 million was spent to coordinate Zoom and in-person meeting. $3 million was used to write a report that analyzed where priority spots were utilized. $1.4 million went towards physically observing mailing and critical operations. And somehow this is being presented as evidence of widespread government waste and corruption. But let's be real, does any of this actually sound unusual for a federal agency? First, $4.6 million for Zoom and in-person meeting remote learning has been a thing for years now, especially during COVID. Schools, especially in rural areas, need federal grants to support virtual learning. It makes sense that the DOE who allocates funds to make sure students in remote areas can still access education. What exactly is this problem here? Should schools just not provide remote learning option? Should teachers and administrators not be able to coordinate effectively? Are we really at the point where we are mad that the Department of Education is spending money on education? Then we have got the $3 million for a report on whether previous reports were being utilized. Sounds like an internal audit. This is really how organizations function. You don't just keep producing reports and never check if they are actually being used. That would be a waste of money. In fact, spending $3 million to analyze efficiency could end up saving way more in the long run. But instead of recognizing that, people are screaming about how this is proof of government waste. And finally, $1.4 million to observe mailing and critical operations. Again, sounds like an audit. A large federal agency handling tons of paperwork needs to make sure their operations are running smoothly. Is this really some kind of bombshell, or is it just basic organizational management? But here is what's really funny. The people are pushing this narrative are acting like they are exposed some kind of deep hidden corruption. They started with the government was trying to hide this from you, as if the Department of Education budget isn't public. It is. You can literally go look at it yourself. These numbers were never a secret. There is no conspiracy. And yet people are eating it up. Why? Because it plays into this broader narrative that the government is just constantly wasting your money. That every dollar spent is suspect. And look, I'm not saying the government is perfectly efficient. Of course, there is waste in federal spending. But if you are going to be mad about government waste, be mad about something that is actually matters. Like, let's talk about the military budget. The Pentagon literally loses track of billions of dollars. They fail the audit every single year. Yet somehow the people losing their minds over 4.6 million for Zoom meeting don't have the same energy for the trillion spent on defense contract that go nowhere. The same people yelling about the DOE budget don't seem to care that corporations get massive tax breaks while regular people struggle to afford rent. But you know why? That is because this kind of outrage is manufactured. Someone finds a tiny, relatively efficient piece of government spending, blows it out of proportion, and pushes it as if it's some huge revelation. And because a lot of people don't actually look at the number, they just go along with it. They hear millions of dollars wasted and assume the worst. But when you zoom out, when you put these numbers in context, it's clear that this is just another example of selective outrage. And honestly, this isn't even just about the Department of Education. This happens all the time. It's part of a larger effort to undermine public institutions. Because if you can convince people that the Department of Education is corrupt and wasteful, then you can push for privatization. You can specify cutting funding for public schools, pushing more students toward private institutions, charter schools, and for-profit education model. It's the same playbook we see with healthcare, social security, and other public services. First, they tell you these institutions are efficient, then they push for budget cuts, and when those cuts inevitably lead to worse outcomes, they say, see, public services don't work. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And let's not ignore who benefits from this kind of narratives. The more people believe public institutions are failing, the more they are willing to accept policy that shift power and money in the hands of corporations. That is why you see Fox News and right-wing media pushing this kind of story. They don't actually care about government ways. They care about shaping public opinion in a way that benefit their agenda. And that bring us to the reactions, because people hasn't just letting this slide. The internet has been tearing this apart. People are pointing out that the numbers don't add up, that this entire scandal is laughably inefficient compared to the total budget, and that anyone who actually looks into this will realize it's a nothing burger. But of course, the people pushing this narrative hasn't interested in the facts. They are interested in the clicks, outrage, and pushing a political agenda. So, what do we do with all this? Well, first, don't fall for the outrage but whenever you see a claim like this, ask yourself, where's the total budget? How does this spending compare? Is this actually unusual, or is it just being framed to look bad? Always check the comments. Second, recognize when narratives like this are being used to manipulate public perception. The goal here isn't just to make people mad about $5 million, it's to build distrust in public institutions so that people are more willing to accept privatization, budget cut, and policy that ultimately benefit corporations and the wealthy. And finally, if you are really concerned about government spending, direct that energy toward the real issues. Ask why the Pentagon can't pass an audit. Ask why billionaires are paying less in taxes than working class Americans. Ask we always Ask why we always have money for war but never for healthcare or education. Those are the conversations that actually matters. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Are you buying this so-called scandal, or do you think it's just another case of manufactured outrage? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's talk about it. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future breakdowns. See you in the next one.